Good afternoon. I'm going to put up a slide presentation more to keep me on point than anything else, because I think there's a lot to cover that wouldn't fit neatly into the slide presentation. Can everyone see my slides? Great. So first, I'm delighted to be here. I know several of you in this meeting, but there are a lot of people I haven't met. I am going to apologize because the beginning of the slide presentation is going to cover several things that I think you probably know a lot about, because I want to level set it for everyone who's there. As Kira said, my background with respect to reparations is largely Evanston and representing things that Evanston has done or that the community is doing. And a lot of that ties back to FirstRepair and quite frankly, Robin, since one of the roles that isn't articulated on my resume is doing whatever Robin asked me to do. And I found that to be incredibly rewarding, largely because there has been so much progress made, not just in Evanston, but around the country. So for those of you who haven't heard this a million times, Evanston is a small city immediately north of Chicago. The statistics are right there. About 13,000 people or so about who are Black out of 75,000 in total. Not surprisingly, the Black community's median household income is roughly half of the white community. And a lot of the reason happens to be because of the way that the community was segregated and still is segregated, but by design, that where the city actually contributed to the segregation, as did Northwestern University and other major institutions, the local hospitals, for example. So we have a legacy here that when I'm talking to communities that look more like me, I usually refer to as diverse but not inclusive. And I say that even though there's a definite sense within Evanston that progress is being made, it still is at the very beginning of a long journey that this community will make, along with hopefully many communities around the United States. So the way I like to talk about reparations is beyond just the city efforts, that there are sort of three components that you can broadly structure into what's happening here in Evanston. And the first is municipal action, and I'll take you through that very briefly, although Councilwoman McFarland did a very nice job of updating you a couple of minutes ago, and then talk about contributions to repair and the role of the religious community, because it's very significant here. So as I think you know, there were two city council resolutions in 2019. The first one was a commitment to end structural racism and achieve racial equity. The second one was involved with establishing the reparations program, and the reparations subcommittee was funded with tax revenues of $10 million over, which is $1 million a year over 10 years. And as you just heard, the revenue flowing in from that has been relatively slow because the number of cannabis dispensaries in Evanston is much smaller than we had originally anticipated. That was then, as I note down lower in the PowerPoint, augmented by an additional 10 million in reparations that, as Councilwoman McFarland noted, is from a real estate transfer tax. And we all heard the breaking news that the city, out of its general funds, is going to advance the money that otherwise would fund from the cannabis tax, which is excellent news because there is a significant backlog of ancestors that should receive some form of reparations voucher. And it'll be very exciting to see how the city program develops. I left in here, and I'm sure you've seen it before, and I'll reference it a little later on as well, a white paper that is on the city's website that documents the harm that the city directly contributed to, and therefore why a reparations program was appropriate for the Black community and using tax revenues. Contributions to repair come in a very different form, and every community will have it occur in a remarkably idiosyncratic manner. Here, it happened that we have a vibrant and capable community foundation that is called the Evanston Community Foundation. And as Kira said, I'm the treasurer of the foundation and on the board. And we were approached in late 2020 by the organization in formation, the Reparations Stakeholders Authority of Evanston, and asked if we would be willing to form a fund, the Evanston Reparations Community Fund, to accumulate contributions to repair from the community at large and, quite frankly, from around the country. And we did establish that fund. We decided that as part of our efforts to repair, we would not charge any explicit fees for the reparations fund, and we provide investments and administration and support to the Reparations Stakeholders Authority of Evanston, which itself is now a nonprofit tax-exempt entity that has a board that is in development to handle the distributions from that fund. And I'll get to the rest of that a little later. One of the things that you may have heard, because we've done a number of these, is Robin Ruth Simmons and Saul Anderson have taken, and he's the president of the Evanston Community Foundation, have created a presentation about the role of philanthropy in reparations that has been repeated a number of times around the country and recorded several times as well. And where there is a community foundation in your community, it is well worth seeing if you can get them involved. There are other nonprofits that could also play the role. So don't despair if there isn't a community foundation. There may be another nonprofit organization that can provide that investment and administration structure to create and accept donations. So the religious community has had a number of iterations. I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on this slide with things that are not on the slide. Back in early 21, several religious institutions took note of what the city was doing and decided that individually and collectively, it might be valuable for us to see how we could provide assistance. And in order to do that, we had to start by educating our communities. I happen to lead the working group at Beth Emet's Synagogue, which is the larger of the two Jewish synagogues in Evanston. And we started in part because we have a very significant history of engaging in social action within this synagogue. And so there were a number of people who were interested in what was going on with reparations, and they were interested in this nascent effort that the Evanston Community Foundation had gotten involved in, called the Reparations Stakeholders Authority. And so we created a policy paper that was originally intended to focus on why members of our synagogue should support reparations in Evanston and then more broadly around the country. And somewhat to our surprise, that policy paper got first national and then eventually international distribution as a method of, if you will, allied advocacy for reparations. The synagogue hosted a number of educational events, including one that had leadership from the RSAE and Robin, and Sheila Jackson Lee and Jan Schakowsky, who is a member of our synagogue, talking about reparations. And we have continued over the last few years to build and develop and deliver both our own bespoke educational programs, and in fact borrowed one from the Jewish community of Amherst, Massachusetts, that's called The Stolen Beam, which is a reference to a story in the Jewish religious text that explains the accountability of the owner of a home with a stolen beam, where they discover there's a stolen beam, of doing something to repair the damage done to the original owner, whether that is to pay the owner or to tear down the house and restore the beam. So there's a very long history of support of various methods of reparations and repair within Jewish theology that came into play very helpfully in building that course and are localizing it in Evanston. We've also began actually in early 21 to share our thinking and get the input from others well outside of the Jewish community, both in Evanston and nationally, but particularly in Evanston. That caused a coalescing of support among a number of faith institutions in Evanston. And there are a lot of faith institutions in Evanston. I believe there are 92 institutions in our town of 75,000 people. 18 of them got together in a group called the Interfaith Clergy and Leaders. And they concluded that collectively our institutions needed to get not only engaged in supporting Evanston's reparations, but supporting reparations in general. And so on Juneteenth of last year, we met in Fountain Square, a member of the clergy and a lay leader from each of these institutions, and publicly signed a commitment to support reparations that ranged from raising money for the Evanston Reparations Community Fund to supporting HR 40 or an executive order or anything that might happen nationally, but also to continue to reach out and find other methods of repair and reconciliation. So taking that forward, we agreed that we would hold an interfaith service on Martin Luther King Day this past year, and it ended up being a full weekend of activities. I had the honor of arranging for Robin to come and speak at our synagogue on the Friday night service, and which she did, and I had the joy of introducing her. But to me, one of the most special parts of the evening, because this was the weekend of Martin Luther King weekend, and Martin Luther King himself had spoken from the pulpit at Beth Emet Synagogue, and it's something we're very, very proud of. This is at a time when Evanston would not allow him to stay in any other place than a Beth Emet congregant's home. And so we have a recording of that that we've actually provided to the Shorefront Legacy Center here in Evanston. But at the end of Robin's speech, Rabbi London, who was also directly engaged in supporting reparations, not only in Evanston, but nationally, said, and I quote, this is a special weekend for us because Martin Luther King spoke from this pulpit, and maybe 50 years from now, we'll say that this is a special weekend because Robin Rue Simmons spoke from the pulpit, which for those of us who know Robin was a moment of great joy. So to continue that weekend, we had an interfaith service that Sunday that was actually at Robin's church in the 5th Ward, which is in the heart of the Black community, and announced the results of the fundraising effort for 2022 and that number was $840,000. The clergy also recommitted all of us to further actions in 2023, and thus far, most of us have started up our fundraising efforts for 23 to be announced presumably on Martin Luther King Day of 24. But also there have been several educational sessions that have occurred that really are bringing more people into the discussion about reparations and really helping them understand the dimensions of the harm. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is how you might think of supporting reparations in your community, and importantly, if you are someone who looks like me, if you're white, or you're not a member of the Black community and you're not white, there are some things you can do. And I've been asked a number of times to sort of pull together a list of thoughts on this. And so I'll offer it to you, and then we can talk about it. So I start with read, listen, and learn, because anybody who is interested in beginning the journey of supporting reparations really needs some knowledge to do that. And within your community, there's almost someone, certainly someone or a number of people who are more than capable and almost always willing to spend the time and educate you. And that doesn't mean you're supposed to consume large amounts of their time. It means that you're supposed to try to understand what they're doing and what role you might play. And then as you learn, communicate. And this sounds very simple, but it ends up being a lot more complicated than you might think, because it means literally every opportunity that you have. And you know, those of us who've been involved in it for several years and have been at least acknowledged as somebody involved in the effort, find that it's almost impossible for me to have a conversation with someone who knows anything about what's going on in Evanston or has any interest in reparations without the conversation migrating there. I used to purposely migrate it there. Now I don't have to. It just sort of comes up as part of the natural conversation. And sometimes those conversations are very positive and sometimes they're very challenging, but I've had enough of them that I'm ready to do it and comfortable doing it. We are regularly seeking opportunities to educate ourselves further, because obviously things are going on in reparations all the time that make it very, very different. And two, to educate others. And so whether we're doing that specifically within Beth Emet's community, within the Jewish community in Evanston, within the broader religious community in Evanston, or in a number of ways across the country, one that I think is particularly interesting is helping to put together a toolkit for Jewish communities around the country to discuss, educate, and inform themselves as how they can support reparations. Which brings me to advocacy. So there are several dimensions to advocacy. Evanston happens to be very fortunate because it has an engaged city council and mayor and local representatives, and quite frankly, state and national representatives who are supportive of reparations and either quite fluent and engaged in it or reasonably fluent and supportive. I know that is not always the case, but advocacy doesn't also have to be just local. The group that is putting together the toolkit for the Jewish congregations across the United States is the Religious Action Center, which is the advocacy arm of the Reform movement in the United States, which is one of the major Jewish movements. And they are themselves supportive of reparations, as is the Reform movement in general. But being supportive and having current information are two different things, and being supportive and understanding about local reparations are very different. And so I've spent a fair amount of time, as has my working group, keeping them informed. And in fact, our synagogue actually has a member of a task force working on all of that. nationally. Contribute, I've talked about contributions, but there are different kinds of contributions, and I'll bring that into relief in a moment. Donations, I just did talk about. And then most importantly, even those of us who are leaders in other environments need to recognize that this is a Black-led movement, and it needs to be a Black-led movement. And our role is to add our voice and our support and be there as is appropriate, as deemed appropriate by the leaders. So bringing that back to Evanston for a moment, and then I'll stop and take questions. We were very lucky because Shorefront Legacy had created a harm report. I think several of you have heard how quickly Dino Robinson was able to turn his research into something that could be used by the city. There is a broad and growing network of people in this community who are not only talking about reparations as I've described it, but other ways of repair. One of the things that gets lost when we talk about reparations is it's not one cataclysmic municipal event. It's a series of momentous things that occur, and sometimes not momentous things that just cause people to become more comfortable talking to each other about the real issues that affect the community, and a desire to move forward to address them. Educational programs are occurring all the time. The Big Payback has provided a new impetus, as well as an excellent discussion guide that is on the FirstRepair website to support that. Advocacy. As I said, we have very supportive political leaders here, so it's easy, but it's not always going to be easy, and we have to be prepared. Contributions are not just about money. They're often about time and, very important, connections. Some of us have gotten involved in connecting attorneys and accountants and other kinds of professional organizations, and many of which are prepared to do work pro bono for reparations. So thinking about that when you talk to your allies, or when you are allies, it's not just what you can do in terms of talking to people or donating money. It's also about what you can do that is related to the network you have. And then, as I said, our role is to follow and not lead. So the reason we're doing this is because we believe it's morally and ethically necessary, and quite frankly, in my case, Judaically necessary. And we believe it is to heal our society. In Judaism, there is a concept called tikkun olam, which we are all expected to follow, which actually translates to heal our broken world. And then finally, because we want to be on the right side of history, and we believe fundamentally that righting the historic wrongs in this country and bringing our society to a level where everyone has the same right and same ability to experience the same way of life is the right side of history. And with that, I will stop the formal presentation, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Matt. Does anyone have any questions for Matt?
Matt, I was going to ask for a bit of clarification, who holds the funds and what that has to do with the city funds, because sometimes people think they're one and the same.
Yes, often people think they're the same. They're not. The city actually also has a capacity to take donations. That is not this. The reparations, the Evanston Reparations Community Fund is a fund, nonprofit fund, that is organized under the aegis of the Evanston Community Foundation, which itself is a 501c3. Evanston Community Foundation manages about 35 million in assets in a single portfolio, most of which is other agencies' money. So other entities within Evanston that have chosen to give us the money to manage and provide administration for, but not to distribute. It is the responsibility to distribute is the Reparations Stakeholders Authority of Evanston, which is a completely separate entity that is also a 501c3. We happen to meet monthly to see how we can help the RSAE and support them. We've given them several grants. At one point, we even served as their fiscal sponsor, but they are completely separate because the distributions must be determined by the Black community. So the RSA's board is entirely from the Black community. Hopefully that helps.
Absolutely. Thank you. I know this is a topic that many from the feedback from our December symposium requested a breakout session on. So I'm glad that we were able to do that today. And we do want to leave just a few more minutes for any questions before we move on.
I did want to
Yes.
ask
Sean?
Yes, oh, I'm sorry, Sean first.
You're on mute.
I'm not sure why my name is Sean Mayberry. It's a technical thing, but my name is really Joan Rothenberg. I've been following and involved peripherally in reparations since the first Juneteenth parade in Evanston in 2021. I can't remember which year. Anyway, in any case, I would love to hear a very basic set of issues described further to jog my own mind. I have lots of passionate energy to use and have on reparations in our community. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about just some examples of non-dollar contributions.
Sure. I'll start with how I got introduced to the movement in general. I was retiring as a full-time member of the full-time president of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago, and I got connected to Dino Robinson because we were going to be discussing this fund that we were going to create. And I got on the phone with him and I said, you know, I have a longstanding commitment to elevating racial equity. And I don't know what that means, but I think reparations might be a part of it in my retirement. Is there something I could do to help? And his initial reaction was, I can't think of anything. And I said, well, surely there must be something that's vexing you right now. And he said, well, you know, it's not a big thing, but, you know, we need to put in an application for a 501c3. And we need to hire an attorney to do that, and that's actually expensive. And you know, can you do anything with that? And I said, well, give me a moment. If you give me 2 weeks, I'll get back to you and see if I can't get a pro bono attorney to do it. And I contacted some friends at some of the leading law firms in Chicago, and the first one that came back said, yes, we'd love to do that, and we'd love to assign an associate. And that's how all of a sudden a law firm that was doing the work for free and a leading law firm got engaged in that work. There have been other instances of helping to line up banks that could support the recipients of the vouchers, accounting firms that would be willing to work on reparations in some form. It goes as broadly as the individual who's helping's network, right? So it's and sometimes it's just a matter of, as you said earlier, you know, getting out and marching, being involved in demonstrations. I've been in several of the Fountain Square demonstrations, including some where, you know, questions were asked as to why the white community is not marching, is not engaged, is not supporting our citizens in the Black community. So, you know, it's not it's not a unique situation to Evanston. It's a state of mind. And so if people are willing to go beyond what they think the normal contribution is, which invariably is cash, and add to cash, not do the cash, but add to cash things that they should do that might actually be more impactful, right? That might actually provide greater value, that may take a little bit of risk in their way because they then have to be public about their support. But I'm long since past that, and I know a number of my friends are long since past that, and finding it incredibly rewarding to see the movement move forward.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I did get a number of little threads to follow as you were talking. Very different, but you did, that was helpful. And also just wonderful, wonderful story to hear.
Thank you. Now Melissa has a question.
Yes, hi, and thank you for speaking with us today. And pardon my cat in the background here. As Linda alluded to at the top of the meeting, we in Virginia are looking at what we can do to move forward with getting a reparations task force and actually implementing some actionable change. Back in 2019, 2020, the state legislature and governor at the time did do a study and formed an ad hoc commission on the inequities in our legislative laws and statutes in Virginia, and some of their recommendations from the reports were to codify this commission going forward. We really want to go beyond only the study phase and now get into an actual implementation task force phase, take it to that next level. Do you have recommendations as to how to start forging the necessary alliances with legislators and those that we need to help educate on the purpose and the need and the requirement, I'd say, to be able to move forward on actual reparations task force?
If your question is with respect to all allies, which is where I think I'm at least partly competent to
Yes.
to address, I would start where we ended up centering, which was the religious community. You're starting with clergy and lay leaders who have generally, not all of them. Obviously, we have, the most active group is 18 out of 92. So it's a percentage, but it's an important percentage in our case because they're large institutions. But you have people who tend to think of things in moral and ethical and religious terms. And so you're starting from an elevated point of view. That is not always the case. I've certainly run into people who don't start there, but it gives you a better shot at moving forward. The other thing, and I'll use Jan Schakowsky as the example in our case, it is not unusual to have policy people, political and or career, who are members of those institutions. And so that doesn't hurt either in terms of credibility, but getting the clergy on board is critical. You can do it as a lay group, but things move along considerably faster when you have the moral suasion of the clergy to go with you.
Thank you very much.
Aziza has a question.
Yeah, my question was related to the non-monetary support. There is a group here in Massachusetts that has leaned on that sort of model for getting folks to set up for community events, or getting folks to donate even a grill for Juneteenth, for the Juneteenth cook-off. So I I like appreciate that, and I would love to like understand and think about how like like communities can create like a grocery list or like a wish list for that type of support. Like if you have any suggestions.
I don't, but I see where you're going. What has happened in Evanston is this is not the first time that some groups of clergy and some lay leaders have gotten together over an important issue for the community. One of the things that allowed us to move this forward in a way that was, um, quite frankly, very exciting is because many of the relationships already existed. So we had the ability to reach left and right to across the lay community, and the clergy operated in two groups. And I think it's important to note that because they still do. There is a group that is largely not Black that is called Evanston Clergy and Leaders. And there is a group that is largely Black, or I think it actually is entirely Black, that is called Evanston Own It. And they are separate groups. And actually, until last Passover / Easter, other than individuals who had very strong relationships with each other, my rabbi and the pastor of Second Baptist Church, for example, they'd never met. And they met for the first time at our synagogue last year to discuss reparations and how they might work together. And now there's a working group of 6 clergy, 3 from Evanston Own It and 3 from the Evanston Interfaith Clergy, that have worked on interracial um, uh, religious and interfaith programs where we can not only learn together, but then have small discussion groups together and usually a meal together. In fact, they had one a few weeks ago. We have another one coming up in March. These are new. But quite frankly, the fact that Evanston Own It and Evanston Interfaith Clergy are working together is new. And these are, they may not sound huge, but they are significant acts of repair. So, you know, we talk about repair in a particular way, and that particular way is important. You know, the United Nations articulates, I think, at least, depending on how you look at combining them, 5 major principles of repair, and all of them are relevant. But some of these that involve getting to know and work effectively with each other and support each other end up being wonderful byproducts of what the city of Evanston did and what all of us are now trying to follow. And the city is not standing still. It's moving forward on its programs, and the clergy are moving forward on their programs. And we expect that this is creating the foundation of a broader level of repair in the city. And I find that to be the most exciting thing that's going on, because you can feel the difference. In fact, we'll see whether it comes out the way I'd like to see it come out. There's a Northwestern professor whose name is Alvin Tillery, who has put together a survey for the residents of the city of Evanston. And the mayor distributed it, and it's gone up on the city website, and FirstRepair has provided access to it. And all of us in our various religious groups are providing access to it, so we can get the largest response rate, therefore the most representative response rate. I am sure that information will be shared when it's done. I can guarantee you, knowing the city of Evanston, that it won't be perfect, but it will be indicative of what I'd like to think is a movement forward in a city that just happens to have discovered that this is not just the right thing to do, but something that has healing effects across the city, not just in a single community.
Next, we have Lode has a question.
Yes, thank you. My original question, I believe Melissa asked in part, Georgia, I'm here in the state of Georgia, and we have great ground support, great grassroots movements. However, it is our state legislator that tend to do a lot of the delaying and the denying. So initially, your response to Melissa in connecting with the policy people at their religious institutions, we can definitely do that first and foremost. That'll be a great entryway. Thank you for that. However, do you have any suggestions on how to move away from the stalling tactics of study commissions? So right now, Fulton County has a reparations task force, but it's for the study. Georgia is notorious for studying. And right now we can safely move past the study groups and again, be more effective and impactful with the money that is being allocated for reparations. So do you have any suggestions on how we can persuade or move the current study group or move away from these study groups when it comes to state legislation?
I wish I did. If I did, the state of Illinois would probably have done it also, and you know that they haven't. The only thing I suggest, and it's only because I've seen the power of it where it occurs, is get non-state institutions to move on reparations, influential state institutions. Influential religious institutions. You know, there are discussions going on at the national level, for example, with the Presbyterian Church, where if it happens on a national level, it's going to affect all of us because anyone who has a significant Presbyterian community, and Evanston has several of them, will be influenced by that. The educational institutions, you know, we have several in our area, one very large one that has not yet come out formally in any way in support of reparations, but that obviously would be another way of sort of building momentum. Because I look at state reparations as being sort of one stage greater than local reparations. And I think momentum on the local level really is important. I had the honor of going to a convening in Bellagio, Italy last summer on reparations. And the determination there, and this was talking about reparations around the world, was that the best way of moving reparations forward was local reparations in the United States. And by local reparations, I think, I'm virtually certain they didn't mean state. They meant, you know, urban areas, counties, towns, because that's where the likelihood is most possible, because the intersection between the people who have been harmed and are being harmed and the rest of the community is so tight. It's very easy, the farther away you get from that center of harm, to just not look at it, or to believe that your constituents don't value it the same way you might, or to not value it at all. Because let's be serious, there are people who don't. And the thing that I believe helped Evanston tremendously is we had a lot of the pieces in place. And then we had some very brave people who were willing to push it forward, to act and stop studying. And I make no bones about it. I don't have to. I know many of those people, and I'm none of them. So I can honor them because they have been and continue to be brave in just moving it all forward. You know, Robin's been noted for saying we have to do something, and they did. And, you know, there's another old Jewish saying, which is a little bit of light dispels a lot of darkness. And I think that's a very powerful way of looking at local reparations.